Boxing Day. It's great to be here with the Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, today at the Vaccination Hub here in Homebush. Firstly, I want to begin by thanking everybody across the state for the amazing sacrifices that people are making. As we move through this next phase, there's no doubt there's going to be inconvenience. And there are many people right across our state and right across the country yesterday who were isolating at a time of Christmas and had to make the sacrifice of not being with family and friends. And as difficult as that is, as we move through this next phase, those inconveniences will continue. But the efforts that we make will ensure that we keep our state safe. And I have the strong view that New South Wales is in a very good position. And we will stand tall during this difficult time. And as case numbers continue to increase, more sacrifices will need to be made as there are isolations and those rules across the board. But those rules are in place to keep our community safe, and we'll continue to do that as we move through this next phase of the pandemic. But what's been very pleasing is the amazing efforts that everyone has made. And here at our vaccination hub, our health workers on Boxing Day, on the front line, are getting those booster shots into arms. On Christmas Eve, we hit 95% first dose. What an amazing achievement from the efforts that everybody has made across our state. I think I can speak for the Health Minister that we never believed that we would reach that rate. When you go back months ago, to be in a position now where we have one of the highest vaccination rates, not just in the country but globally, ensures that as we open up, we're able to do so as safely as possible. And so my message out today is if you haven't been vaccinated, please do so. Please make that effort. 95% is high, but we can still do better. It's very clear from ICU presentations that the majority of people who are in ICU are unvaccinated. That is at a time when 95% of our people here in New South Wales have received their first dose vaccination. So the numbers don't lie. Please go out and get vaccinated. If you've had your first dose, please go and get your second dose when you're eligible. And then in addition to that, as the Health Minister will go through today, when Targi has moved that date forward from your second dose vaccination, so that's now at 4 months. So please, if you are eligible, go and get that booster shot. We know that boosters work. Boosters are a level of protection that will keep people safe. I'm due for my booster shot now, and I'll be getting it later today. This is the efforts that we need to make to go out and keep our community safe. And so far, I think the results are incredibly pleasing. As I say, there will be challenges that come our way, but New South Wales remains strong. And if we get through this, we will do so together. And I have complete confidence in the people of our state to do that. I want to thank our health workers, not just here at the vaccination hubs, but the 40 vaccination hubs around the state, which will continue to operate during this period of time, and all our health workers in our hospitals as well. There will be challenges. Let's not shy away from that. There will be challenges as we move through this next phase, but we will get through it, and I particularly want to thank those frontline health workers day in, day out, over Christmas, here on Boxing Day, doing everything they can to keep our community safe. So on behalf of everybody across our state, can I thank you? In relation to testing numbers remain incredibly strong, and once again, can I thank everybody for the effort they're making. The Health Minister will go into some further detail in relation to this, but I just want to make the point again in respect of testing. If you do not feel unwell, if you are not required to be tested and have not been directed so by New South Wales Health, or you are not travelling interstate and that is a requirement, there is no need to be tested. When the QR code from Service New South Wales alert comes through, it says very clearly, monitor your symptoms. If you feel unwell, then get tested, or if you are directed so by New South Wales Health. What we can't have are people sitting in testing queues, which takes away from people who are unwell and who need that test, because we want to get those tests back as quickly as possible, particularly for people who are unwell, and in addition to that, so that people who are travelling interstate can do so. Obviously, I've been working very closely with the other state premiers to move away from PCR testing to rapid antigen tests for those people who are travelling interstate. And I appreciate the Queensland Premier's movement there to bring that to rapid antigen testing from 1 January. But in the meantime, there is still going to be pressure on the system. I want to thank everybody for their patience. I know there are long queues right across our state, so if we can help with that, if you do not feel unwell, if you are not advised by New South Wales Health, there is no need to receive a PCR test. You are taking the spot in the queue from somebody who needs a test. In addition, today from tomorrow, obviously QR codes will be back. Now, as we discussed a couple of days ago, what we'll be doing here is, particularly in a retail setting, we will have one check-in code. You just need to check in when you go into a retail centre. You won't need to do it at every single store. And that's on the advice of New South Wales Health because, as I said, that all links back to testing. When you do receive a notification, that's just for your own personal information that there had been a COVID case at some point in time at that venue. That does not mean you need to get a test. So once again, monitor for symptoms. If you feel unwell, then get a test, or if you're directed so by New South Wales Health. So once again, before I pass to the Health Minister, can I thank everybody for their efforts. I know for many this is a difficult time, and as we move through this next phase, there'll be more challenging times that come our way. There'll be a greater need as case numbers increase for more people to isolate. But this is the challenge that we are facing into, and New South Wales will stand strong. We've got through, as a state, the last 2 years together, and we will get through this difficult time. I have complete confidence in our people to continue to make the efforts, to continue to make the sacrifices that will get New South Wales through this next period of time. So to everybody across the state, Merry Christmas and thank you for everything you're doing.
Brad. Thanks very much, Premier. I also would just like to thank all the health staff who've worked so hard over this Christmas period and will continue to work hard across our entire health system here in New South Wales to ensure that all of us have the best care possible, world-class care. Can I say, though, each and every one of us have an individual responsibility here to get vaccinated. There is no question that vaccinations, particularly once you have the booster, will empower you to meet the oncoming Omicron variant of this coronavirus. Bottom line here is that we would expect that pretty well everybody in New South Wales at some point will get Omicron. We're all going to get Omicron. And if we're all going to get Omicron, the best way to face it is when we have full vaccination, including our booster. The challenge for us in the state is to make sure that our health system can cope with that oncoming virus that is so transmissible. It's extremely transmissible. And generally, what we're finding, though, in the early stages, and both international evidence and the state evidence here and the Australian evidence, is that Omicron is not as severe in terms of its impact on individuals. That is a huge plus for all of us. But quite clearly, it does impact on those who are unvaccinated. The majority of people who are in intensive care in New South Wales and requiring health staff to be looking after them, putting them at risk also, are people who have not been vaccinated. So the unvaccinated are taking more places than perhaps should be, or actually no, they're taking more places than they should be in our ICUs simply because they've chosen not to be vaccinated. There are some, of course, who may not be are not able to get vaccinated, but those who make the choice not to get vaccinated are putting themselves and, of course, our health staff at risk. So, again, I implore you all to go and get vaccinated. The Premier's talked about the amazing vaccination rates from the bulk of the community, up at 95% first dose for the majority of the community, obviously. But we're still keen to see younger people get vaccinated. If you're in that age bracket 12 through to 15, then certainly you can also be vaccinated. We need to get those percentages up as well to keep that particular group safe. And currently we're sitting at 81.6 for the first dose for 12 to 15-year-olds and 78.3% for the second dose. So there's a bit of work to do there. And to mums and dads out there, the best present you can give your 12 to 15-year-old at the moment for Christmas and the New Year is to go and get vaccinated. Please book into a New South Wales vaccination clinic. We have spaces available. Or, of course, you could book in with your GP or your pharmacist. PCR tests. I think it's fair to say that over the first 2 years of this virus, we've all been put on high alert as to the dangers of the virus, and so people are now reacting and getting into very long queues to get PCR tests. I remember back when this all started, back January 25th, 2020, and over the ensuing months we thought we were doing very well when we managed to get 40 or 50,000 tests. We're now getting something in the order of 130 to 160,000 tests a day, and that on the face of it sounds good. But then we need to consider, why are people being tested and why are we putting the stresses on our pathology system? Well, of course, in many cases it is forced upon us by direction from health, or because other states, South Australia, Queensland and so on, are insisting on PCR tests for travel. Number one, as Health Minister, I certainly send again the message to those states that getting PCR tests is putting an enormous pressure on our pathology system and minimising the capacity for proper clinical PCR tests that are needed for people to really determine whether or not they have COVID because they have symptoms and they've been directed to by health. So I would certainly be saying to those state governments, please rethink that, and the Premier I know is working on that, talking to his colleagues, talking to the other Premiers, but as Health Minister I strongly implore them to review that situation as soon as is possible. The other aspect about that is to a degree we know that if you have a PCR test on day one and when you're getting your results within say 12 hours to 24 hours, well it was valid. But if you're not getting results to 3 or 4 days, which is now the case because of so many people asking for PCR tests, it may well be that you've developed a positivity or positive viral response anyway and you wouldn't know it. So I'm not sure that it's actually helping the other states and territories anyway in regard to that aspect. But I have heard also people saying, I'm getting it because I'm visiting Auntie Mabel in 3 or 4 days. Well, if you have a test today and then you're visiting Auntie Mabel in 3 or 4 days, it may well be that by then you're positive. So a far simpler, far quicker measure would simply to be get a rapid antigen test the day you're going to see Auntie Mabel, and preferably about half an hour beforehand. Go and actually get a rapid antigen test, check you're okay, and then your results are there. And obviously this is a matter of risk management. We know that rapid antigen tests may not have the same accuracy level, but if it's going to be 3 or 4 days before you get the result, you're better off with a rapid antigen test. Finally, I just want to say this, that the staff are run off their feet in our hospitals. We have about 2,000 staff that are furloughed at the moment, which means they're not actually in the hospital to look after patients. That's putting enormous pressure on other staff in our hospitals. So I would like everybody to think about whether or not you really need to call an ambulance, number one, and number two, go to hospital. As I said earlier, everybody in New South Wales is probably going to get Omicron at some stage. Everybody in Australia will get Omicron. And what we're seeing at the moment is far milder symptoms. And most of us, if we've lived a few years, would have had a virus at some point. What we know is that we get a temperature, we get certain responses that we can manage through Panadol and fluid. Please just think carefully before you, 1, call an ambulance, or 2, ask to go to hospital, or 3, go to hospital, because it may not be necessary. If, on the other hand, you have serious symptoms and you're finding it difficult breathing or you're having chest pains, of course call an ambulance, of course do that, and of course get to hospital as soon as possible. But the bulk of people who are probably in those queues at the moment, who are worried about whether they should have a PCR test, and the bulk of people who are actually calling hospitals at all hours and saying, can I come to hospital, it may well not be the case that you need to do that. It'll take the pressure off our health system. It will allow our health system to operate for what it should be doing, and that is for people who really need to be in hospital. And of course it'll also take the heat off the pathology capacity, allowing again pathology to be used for what it should be used for, and that is not for visits to Auntie Mabel, but rather to make sure that if you are really sick, if you've really got the symptoms and you've got the COVID variant, Omicron or Delta for that matter, that you can take the necessary steps and put yourself into isolation and do what you need to do. Actually, there is a further thing I should mention as well, and that is this. Obviously, when you get the virus, presuming you don't have to go to hospital and presuming you don't need to get extra medical attention, as the bulk of people would appear to be at this point who are getting the virus, about 10 days after you have had the test, you may get advice from New South Wales Health by way of a text, giving you some advice. But if you don't, and you are symptom-free, there is you are entitled to leave your home. So you don't need to be waiting for someone to give you a free pass or a pass out of your house. So I stress that again. 10 days after you have had your test, if you are symptom-free, you can leave your home because we know that you are very unlikely at that point to be infectious. And that, again, will take the pressure off everybody as long as we realise that we don't need to be rushing off to get medical approval to come out. This is a different way of dealing with it. It's no longer the Delta, it's no longer the earlier variants. It's a variant that we know is very transmissible but not causing the same level of grief at this stage on the basis of international evidence and evidence available in Australia. So we need to weigh up the relative risk and also weigh up how we manage to get back to as normal a life as possible. And that is the strong advice from the New South Wales Health. Thank you.
Just on that point, please, Minister.
Yep.
So if someone we know tested positive 7 days ago, should they expect anything from New South Wales Health? Will they get any contact at all? Because this person hasn't.
If you have comorbidities and if you have other illnesses and there are a range of reasons why health might obviously step in and give you additional advice. But if you are in a situation where you are not suffering from any particular comorbidities, you're not particularly sick, New South Wales Health is under enormous pressure and they may not be in contact with you. Of course, you can actually talk to your GP. Your GP also has the power and capacity to advise you on what's necessary, and you should always take medical advice to that degree. But if you're not particularly sick, then you don't need to be doing very much except probably taking some Panadol if you've got a temperature and making sure you're drinking plenty of fluids. And then at the end of the 10 days after you had the test, you can leave home.
Premier, just on the PCR testing, are you expecting, obviously huge wait times now still, are you expecting that to tailor off as fewer people travel for Christmas and New Year? If not, what are you doing to bolster the capacity? And just secondly, on the procurement of rapid antigen tests, where's the government at with that? Have you got a date?
Okay. In relation to the first question, Tom, look, we do think it will ease. There would have been a lot of travelling prior to Christmas, particularly interstate. Having said that, as we move through this period, I would still expect there to be significant pressure on testing centres around the state as we head into New Year's Eve. This is the holiday season. People have travel plans right across the country. That's why I continue to urge my interstate counterparts to look at ways in which we can ease pressure on the system. The Health Minister's pointed this out very clearly. It is actually less safe for there to be longer queues because the turnaround time is longer, and as a result, we will have more people in the community with COVID than if those test lines were shorter and they were simply filled with people who are required to get a test. So I want to make that clear. We have put all our resources into those testing centres across the state. Now, I would expect those to ease as we head past 1 January, but still we're going to go through a challenging time. I want to thank everybody for the patience that they are showing. It is a challenge, and some of those queues are hours long, and that's why our key message today is if you don't need a test, please don't sit in those queues. Because they are taking the place of somebody who is unwell, who needs a test, who is required to by New South Wales Health or required to by the premiers of the other states for interstate travel. But the reality is, as the Federal Chief Health Officer, the Commonwealth Chief Health Officer has clearly said, there is no need for these PCR requirements for interstate travel. It just puts more pressure on the system. We don't have that in place in New South Wales. and we don't believe it's appropriate for it to be in place in other states. I thank once again the Queensland Premier for the approach that she has taken, but that will still put substantive pressure on our system as we head into the New Year period. I'll just deal with the second question on rapid antigen tests. Look, I've had numerous discussions with the three ministers, Minister Hazzard, Minister Ayres and Minister Tudorhope, in relation to the procurement of those rapid antigen tests, and we'll have more to announce soon as they work through the logistics of doing that. We obviously want to see, I don't want to put a date on it yet, I want to get those rapid antigen tests available to people as quickly as possible. It will not be exclusive. You can still get those rapid antigen tests at your pharmacy, but we want to play a role in encouraging people to get those tests taken at home. So this is the role the state can play as we move through to learning to live alongside the virus. That these tests won't be used, should not be used when we do provide them every single day. They should be used by people, just like many are today. As the Health Minister said, they're going to, who is your Auntie Mabel? As you visit, if you're visiting Auntie Mabel, before you do so, please go and take a rapid antigen test. That alleviates pressure, alleviates substantive pressure on our PCR testing. But at the same time, as we move through this next phase with high vaccination rates, with high booster rates, once we get that program rolling out, which has started today, but over the next few months where it will become more crucial, that this will be the new normal personal responsibility in living with COVID. Personal responsibility meaning you will take those you'll have those tests at home. You can either purchase them at your pharmacy. We will support that. We will support that through this program. But if you're going into the idea here is if you're going into a high-risk setting, if you're visiting an elderly person, if you're going into one of those areas where you might be thinking now, I'll go and get a PCR test. No, have these rapid antigen tests at home. And as we move through 2022, we believe this will become the new norm. So the Investment Minister, the Health Minister and the Finance Minister are working on the procurement of those tests at the moment. And as we have more to say, we will let you know.
Are you annoyed that the other states haven't come to the party insisting on PCR tests in Queensland ahead of January? I mean, this is the busy period.
Oh, look, I have complete respect for every one of the premiers across the country. Every premier has the same philosophical view here, and that's to keep our people safe whilst at the same time opening up the economy. But there's no doubt that these PCR testing requirements, as the Health Minister calls them, the tourism tests, are putting substantial pressure on the system. And that's just not long queues. It's slowing down the turnaround time for New South Wales Health to be able to process those tests and get that information back to people who may be unwell or who may have COVID. So we've had a very good discussion in relation to this at National Cabinet. Certainly the view of the Commonwealth Chief Health Officer, and I want to reduce inconvenience to the people of our state. If we can move from PCR testing to rapid antigen tests as quickly as possible, we should. But look, that's certainly our perspective in New South Wales, but I completely respect and appreciate the views that the other premiers take. Ultimately, they need to keep their people safe. We just don't believe that the requirement of a PCR test for somebody who is not unwell is actually supportive of that view. The best thing that we can do, and the best thing we can do as a country, is ensure that those states that will have more pressure on the system, and that's at the moment New South Wales and Victoria, that we get those tests done as quickly as possible. The faster the queues, the more people will attend who are feeling unwell, and in addition to that, the faster we can get the tests back so we can keep our community safe.
Premier, the number of people now who are testing positive is having a knock-on effect for business.
Yep.
Number of businesses are forced to close.
Yep.
Visit any suburb and you're seeing signs up saying we have to close. Yep. What can you do? What's your response?
This is the challenge that will happen, that we have to face up to as we move through the next phase. As we open up, as we've always said, case numbers will increase. And I know that there will be many sacrifices and inconveniences as we move through this period. But this is the challenge we have to face up to. We have to stand strong and get through this next phase. The alternative, is to close down, is to lock down. What we need to do is open up safely. The health and safety of our people is paramount and our number one concern. But in doing that, unfortunately, there's going to be inconveniences and challenges along the way. And that means we need to make sure that if you do test positive for COVID, you do isolate. And particularly now for close contacts as well. And we changed that definition to reduce the capture of people under that definition of close contact to now those who are living in a household of somebody who tests positive or is deemed by New South Wales Health for there to be, if it was to occur in a high-risk setting.
That's a comfort, Premier, to a business that should be trading at the best time of the year and is now forced to close over the best time of the year.
And the reality is, if we were to open up, as we open up, if we were to change the definition, then further at this stage, without knowing more about the Omicron variant, then that could put substantial pressure on the health system. We have said from day one, the health of our people is paramount. We want to keep people safe during this period of time, and I accept that will provide inconveniences as we move through this period. But this is the challenge we must face up to and stand strong. And we will. But we have always balanced through the entire 2 years of the pandemic, we've always balanced the health and the economy. And we have opened up here in our state throughout this period of time in a way that is safe. Now, I understand that as cases increase, as we said they would, that provides further challenges and inconveniences. But we'll get through it. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is one last push from our state to get through this. As the Health Minister has said, many people, if not everyone, will at some point in time get COVID. The best thing we can do to protect ourselves and our families is to get a booster shot, to get vaccinated. That will ensure there is less pressure on our health system. But Eddie, I accept there are going to be many challenges and inconveniences during this period of time, but we will get through them together as a state. And we've always provided that support for businesses. The alternative is to shut down. We are not going to do that. We're opening up. We're learning to live alongside the virus. But in the short term, as we move through this period of increased case numbers, we need to keep those isolation requirements in place as we learn to understand more about this variant.
Will you reintroduce support for businesses who are struggling during this outbreak?
We've always said we'll adjust our settings based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in. We will look through this period at some of those challenges, and if we can make some adjustments to those programs, we will. Throughout the entire pandemic, and this is as a Liberal government, we have said that we will put our people and our businesses before the budget. We have done that time and time again. We provided record support for businesses in a way that no other state jurisdiction has to help.
Can you do it again?
What I've said is that we'll always look at the circumstances that we're faced with. I know there are many challenges for business. What I would say to businesses across our state, we've been with you over the last 2 years. The alternative, as case numbers increase, is to close down. We're not doing that. What that means is from time to time, as case numbers increase at high numbers, there'll be more people who will be defined as close contacts. There'll be more people who will contract COVID, and during that period, we need to keep things open. That will cause challenges. We'll always monitor the situation and see what we can do as a state. We've been with businesses through this whole period, but we're not going to go backwards. We're not going into lockdowns, and that's the best thing that we can do is keep open, keep people safe, but at the same time, we say to businesses, we accept there'll be challenges. We accept that there'll be inconveniences as we move through.
You've said that you don't want people to be mingling too much.
Yeah.
Would you discourage them from going out today for Boxing Day sales and then later for New Year's Eve?
No. What I would say is that as we've said through this entire journey, take personal responsibility, socially distance, follow the rules that are in place, and by doing that, you look after yourself, you look after your family members, but we are about instilling confidence in our people. Confidence has been key, whether that's consumer confidence, business confidence, in getting our state through the last 2 years, and we're going to get through this as well. Yes, there's going to be challenges. There's no country in the world that is immune from COVID or the challenges that are posed by it. What we need to do is take personal responsibility, look out for one another, treat people with kindness and respect over this holiday period, and we're going to get through it. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are inconveniences. But let's not look at the negative. Let's look at the positive about how well our state has done, how well our country has done through COVID. We've kept the death rate low. We've kept our economy strong. We've kept people in work. We've got to live in the world as it is, not as we want it to be. And every country around the world is facing this challenge. New South Wales' opportunity right now is to get through this last push, stand strong, and lead the nation out of the pandemic.
Are you concerned that...
Can I ask Mr. Hazzard just a few questions?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Before Aaron.
Yeah. What about the Boxing Day sales? Why did you introduce the QR codes mandatory for retail from tonight? Shouldn't it have come in at midnight last night so people were checking in? Are you concerned about a big surge in cases from Boxing Day sales?
No. Obviously QR codes are very much in place. Anybody who has been shopping would see QR codes are existent across the board. What we have said in respect of QR codes, and the reason that, this is, I think, the misconception that the media have at the moment in relation to QR codes, that somehow QR codes were removed in certain settings because of an economic position. It was actually a health position, because what we are seeing, and so I think it's very important to be reported, what we are seeing is people are being notified by Service New South Wales that they have been in a venue. That is leading to increase in unnecessary PCR tests. So the QR codes are in place in a retail setting, and what we're saying is you don't need to check in at every single individual store. When you go into a major shopping centre, you just need to check in once. Otherwise, what we'll continue to have in our state is a misconception that if you receive a notification, you need to get a test. And I know it might sound in this press conference repetitive from the Health Minister and myself, but it is very, very important. Only go and get a PCR test if you are required by New South Wales Health, or you feel unwell, or because of those interstate requirements by the other governments around the country.
Premier, we've got thousands of people isolating now. Others a bit too nervous to travel.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about the impact this is going to have on regional communities again during a time where they should be getting a lot of business?
I accept that as case numbers increase in the short term, as we're moving through this, people feel less confident. But I'm also confident that we're going to get through this period of time and that we will rebound incredibly strongly. So the best thing to do is take the approach that we have here in our state, and that's focus on healthcare but open up the economy. And I know there is concern in the community, particularly over the summer months, but we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it. We've got confidence, got us through the last 2 years. It's going to get us through this next period of time. 22 will be a strong year for our state and for our people. And sure, our regional communities have done it incredibly tough. Droughts, fires, floods, and this pandemic. But we've always sought to keep our regional communities safe. And there is no reason why people shouldn't go and keep those holiday bookings in regional New South Wales. There is no reason. Let's get out and about, enjoy the best that our state has to offer over this holiday season, and we're going to get through it. I know there's always concern. We're in a pandemic. There will naturally be concern, but what I can say is we've invested record amounts in our health system. We have the best hospital and health system in the nation, if not the world, here in New South Wales. We'll keep our people safe, but we're going to open up, and as we open up, we will do so, and that provides confidence to people, despite the fact in the short term there are challenges. I accept that. But let's be confident that we're going to have a bright future and get out and about and enjoy the best that our state has to offer.
That's it, thank you.
Oh, no, I just got some questions for Brad.
Can I just ask Mr. Hazzard just got a few questions?
Sure.
I'll just put them up at the front, at the start.
One at a time. We'll do fine, thank you.
Remember them all. Can you tell us the average delay in New South Wales to receive the results of your PCR test?
Well, let's go with that one first. It varies because we're obviously using public. Initially in New South Wales, the government was using New South Wales pathology services, so government pathology services. But over the twists and turns and uphill down dale of the last 2 years, we've also had contracts with almost all of the major private pathology providers, and those across the entire spectrum of those services, some of them have longer delays than others at various points, but it really does depend on what's going on. I'd say the average at the moment is somewhere between 48 hours and 72, but I have heard in some instances it's been longer than 72 hours.
And so you said today that up to 10 days you don't hear from New South Wales Health, you can just go. Is that a new development, or has that always been the case?
Dr Chant and the public health team have been working in the last couple of weeks trying to make it a more pragmatic system, essentially, because we were hearing that people were expecting, they were staying at home effectively and expecting to get a call, and sometimes they weren't. And so it's a recognition of the pressures in the system. And Dr Chant's view, expressed to me again only this morning, just before she was heading off to a family barbecue, was that 10 days after the test was a reasonable approach, and it's the approach that New South Wales Health are recommending it.
So that's just come into effect now?
No, it's been in effect for a while, but it's been. I think it's a lack of, as I said earlier, I think people have actually been, in the last couple of years, in the various variants that we've had, there's been a far more cautious approach. So, I mean, at one stage that
change in policy, you're just enunciating.
It's a policy that was introduced some time ago. I don't exactly remember when, but it's certainly being more clearly enunciated now.
But the public health order still says that the person...
Sorry, I'll come back to you if Angira... I'll come back to you if Angira doesn't cover what you're talking about.
Apologies for all this question. Also, look, there's a debate out there...
I'll come to you, Angira, sorry, after him.
There's a debate in relation to the 2,000 furloughed hospital staff. Some experts in Coatsworth are saying...
some experts what, sorry?
Some experts, including Nick Coatsworth, are saying let them go to work. I'm sure obviously you would understand the pros and cons. Do you have a view? Is that something you might consider?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's a challenge in the health system, and I'm certainly in deep conversation over the last probably week with the entire, not just the public health unit of health, so Dr Chant's team, but also the broader health team, about whether or not it's viable to have staff coming back sooner. And the reason primarily, though, that it could happen is that staff who work in our hospitals have fitted P95, N2 masks, full PPE, and so if you're erring on the side of caution, it would certainly be an area that you could say probably this would be a safer option than having no staff. So we're looking at all those issues at the moment, and I'm certainly pretty well every day. The only day I didn't have a discussion about that was yesterday on Christmas Day, but again this morning.
So does that mean it'd be accurate to say that you're considering cutting the isolation time for hospital staff below 10 days to address these shortages?
Well, not necessarily if they're positive. It's more if they're a close contact. So I don't think we'd be doing that for anybody who's positive, but certainly people who are in a situation where there's a lack of clarity or certainty about their position. So we're looking at that. Looking at that, not definitive at this point. Yeah. So what's your name?
I'm Aaron Patrick, Fin Review.
We're off in review. Nice to meet you, Aaron. Hi.
And in relation to, you've talked today about the next phase of managing this, and you also said everyone's going to get Omicron. Presumably that means at some point you will drop the isolation requirement for people who contract COVID. Is that a fair assumption to make?
That's all. No, I don't think you should jump that far ahead. We're still working through that. Keep in mind that whilst the Premier and I have a fair handle on all the issues, we still take advice from our public health team and we work with them. I think the Premier's just been on the phone to the Deputy Secretary a couple of times this morning. I've been on the phone to Dr Chant probably half a dozen times. Every day we're talking about these issues, and we'll take the advice from the public health team.
That means that every person in New South Wales at some point is going to have to spend 10 days isolated. That's sort of the conclusion of what you're saying.
If you are positive, it's highly likely that you will be actually spending 10 days after the date of your test, yes. at some point in the next, I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 6 months or a year, it may be a couple of years, it may be 3 years, who knows. We're working through that, and obviously all I'm saying to you is I think because of the earlier variants and because it had such severity on so many people, that the broader community are a little fearful of Omicron, and what I'm saying is that the early evidence, both internationally and here, so our local evidence, is indicating that it's nowhere near as severe. So on that basis, we're looking at how we reconfigure our approach to it. In other words, as the Premier has said many times, and as I've said numerous times, we've got to learn to live with this virus. How do we do that sensibly? And we're working with our public health team to come up with those solutions. I'd like to give you an answer to every question you have, but the one thing I've learnt in the 2 years I've been Health Minister in the middle of a pandemic is these things have to be worked through and the issues have to be discussed with all of the necessary team, not just the public health team, but also, in other words, the people who are the epidemiologists, but also the balance of the health team who look at the effect on pathology, the effect on operationalisation in hospitals, as in how do you operationalise the outcomes of your decisions. It's an interesting challenge.
Sorry,
I think I'd rather work at the AFR. It'd be a lot easier. Yeah, sorry. Angera.
So in terms of the day 10 not requiring to be cleared, right now there's a clause in the public health order that means that you could cop a $5,000 fine if you're not medically cleared. So will you be changing that in line with this new strategy?
I don't know that that's actually accurate, but I'll check that. But certainly the advice from public health, if you follow public health advice, you can't be fined. And the advice is 10 days after you have been tested, 10 days after you've been tested, if you have no symptoms, you have no major issues, you don't have a whole host of other comorbidities, then you can leave your isolation.
The police won't fine.
But I mean, no. But I think again, I'll stress that if you've got some other issues going on, so you've got some comorbidities, or perhaps you're older and a bit more frail, then you need to be cautious. But if you're in a younger age bracket and not dropping things on the floor, you can certainly leave after 10 days from your test.
Severity of Omicron, Minister, in ICU, 50-odd people in there now. Do you know what percentage of them have Omicron?
Look, I can't answer that right now, but there are some who have Delta, obviously. But what we've seen from some of the studies, I think I said this before, some of the early studies are indicating that Delta, up until around about the 14th of December, Delta was the predominant presentation. But over the last couple of weeks, it's certainly been Omicron that's rising quite dramatically.
So do most people in ICU have Omicron?
I think that would reflect those figures, yes.
That's it, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Have a good Boxing Day. If you go to the sales, be careful.